And because I'm always so unprepared for these, I've roped in Art Eniger, writer for Ultraviolet magazine. You can find them up front in the dealer's room. They're always welcome here. So I'm going to let him handle a couple Q&As here. I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll get Day of the Dead on for you. And go.
Howard Sherman has a lot to say about Day of the Dead. He's also been in The Stand and over 40 other productions. So if you have any questions for him at all, he's here to answer them. What about Day of the Dead? Do you want to introduce this film?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about what I would say about the film. I made this movie in late 1984. At the time, I got the job by auditioning for it, and I got the phone call that said I got the job.
Pause. Why don't you tell us about auditioning for the role of Bub?
It was pretty uneventful, as I recall. I mean, I stood in front of the camera, and I don't even remember if George Romero was there. I remember the casting director because it was a friend of mine. I did a guy who was an actor and was kind of moonlighting as a casting director, and he brought me in for this role. My only recollection is that in the script, in the original script, there was not very much to the role. He only appeared in a couple of scenes, and he didn't really have much character on the page. And the casting director told me that Romero had sort of an idea for him, and he said he wanted to have a certain kind of innocence about him. Now, I don't really know anything about the horror genre, the horror medium. I'm not a horror actor. I'm an actor. I do plays, I do movies, I do TV, and this is the only horror movie I ever made. I was in The Stand, but it's not... I approach this role the same way I approach any role. I mean, acting is essentially using your mind and especially your body, kind of tricking it to respond naturally, spontaneously, organically to imaginary circumstances, whatever those imaginary circumstances might be, in order to create a natural, believable zombie, kind of a preposterous notion, would be to try to recreate the thought processes of a zombie. I figure out as smart as a dumb dog. And more than anything, and George Romero had said, I can't remember if he told me this directly or if it was the casting director who told me in the audition, that he wanted a certain innocence about him, a certain kind of, something like an infant. And it so happened I had a friend who had a baby. His wife had recently had a baby, and I spent a little time watching the baby, the way a baby moves, and it's nothing really works yet. They have impulses and they can't really control it. There's a kind of everything just kind of is always in motion without real direct intention. And I probably spent a few hours walking around like that, trying to get to a point where the movement was second nature. Again, something that I do with every character that I've ever played, whatever that character is. Every individual has a way of walking, a way of talking, and you just try to get to a point where your body memorizes whatever decisions as an actor one might make.
Did you watch or rewatch the first two films in preparation for
I've never seen Dawn of the Dead. I had seen Night of the Living Dead, and so I was aware of the the basic idea, a world in which something went wrong and dead people came back to life and tried to eat live people. But my basic approach to it was the same. Using the same techniques that I would approach any role that I played.
The story of what happened after the film was released is almost as interesting as the story of the film itself. Do you want to say anything about what happened once the film was released?
What happened once the film was released?
As far as how the film came out and how it did and how people responded to it.
Well, I remember once having a bizarre experience. I was living in New York at the time, and I mean, an actor's life is hard, and if you're not a star, it's just a tough life. You have no illusions of security ever. You're always on the auction block. You're going from one job to the other, and every time a show closes or a job ends or a movie wraps, you feel like you're never going to work again. And I remember one day, 2 or 3 weeks, and I was in around the Times Square area, and I had an audition, and I had a couple of hours to kill before I had another audition. And it's always kind of a drag when you're stuck in Midtown Manhattan and you don't have anywhere to go or anything to do, but you kind of have to hang around. It doesn't make sense to go all the way to your apartment and then come back downtown. It was, And I suddenly realized I have a movie playing right there in Times Square. I think I'll go see my movie. Now, Times Square in 1985 was not the post Disneyfication of Times Square that it is now. I mean, it was
Still in full form.
Yeah.
Do you recall the name of the theater you saw it at?
No, I don't. I remember it was on the east side of the street, but it was right there in Times Square. And I went inside and I watched the movie, and much to my surprise, I mean, and it's a yeah, it was a curious crowd that was in there.
Describe the crowd. Was it
well,
crowded?
I didn't notice them particularly.
Was it crowded? I mean, what was?
Yeah, it was crowded. It was. I mean, I would say probably recollection maybe 75% full on a weekday afternoon, which is fairly unusual. And toward the end of the movie, as Bub is tracking down the evil Marine captain, in that chase down through the hallways, the audience spontaneously started chanting, "Bub! Bub! Bub!" Somebody yelled out, "Go, Bub!" I couldn't believe my ears. I mean, I had this fantasy of just sitting up here, "I am Bub! Into the streets!" But I didn't do it.
I never believe it.
They would have eaten me. So,
What questions do people have for Mr. Sherman? Someone has questions for him. There's questions for Bub, Mr. Sherman, about The Stand, about any of his work, about Day of the Dead. Yes, in the back.
What's your favorite scene in the movie?
oh, the music, the earphones, by far. That because I think you see something that you completely don't expect to see in a zombie. And it's probably the most personal, truly personal thing of anything I've ever done. Is my response to music. I mean, it's just, I live for music. I love music. I love music. And that's me on the screen there, listening to Beethoven's Ninth. I got in town Thursday afternoon and went to to Severance Hall here in Cleveland and heard this extraordinary piece of music that's very, very, very rarely played. I came here a day early specifically for that purpose. So, I'm a real music freak. So that's definitely the most personal scene in the film for me. Yes?
You and Richard Liberty seem so natural. Did you improvise a lot of those scenes?
Well, that scene in particular was improvised. It didn't exist in the script. In those days, I was kind of keeping in shape by jogging And I hate to run. I always have. I just can't bear it. I run 50 yards and all I can think about is when can I stop? However, I discovered that if I ran to music, and specifically music that was where the beat of the music was the beat of my pace, so that I literally would run to the beat like dancing. If it was music that I dug, I could just go for miles. It made all the difference. And at that time, I was probably two years into that, where 3-4 times a week I would run for 45 minutes, and I had put together these anthologies of music that I really liked. Mostly, a mix of classical and jazz, and the occasional alternative rock or something like that. But it was all music to the beat. So I was out running one day in the middle of the shoot on a day off, and I suddenly had this image came into my head of what would Bub make of music if somebody put earphones on Bub. And it was a funny idea, and I suggested it to George, I think almost as a joke. And he lit up. He really liked the idea, and the next thing I knew, there was going to be a scene in the movie. Because I think it came out of, I showed up on the set, and this character emerged under the makeup and everything, and George liked him so much he wanted more of him in the movie, and the natural idea was for the Richard Liberty character to what else could he train him to do? What else could he, what other activities? We'd done the thing with the gun and the book and the shaving and all of that, and that had been in the script. And so that was where the genesis of the idea. My one recollection, Richard was a very quick guy. He talked fast, he had a lot of energy, he had a lot of and it was hard as hell to get him, because it was improvised, to slow down to zombie speed. I kept telling him, I said, we've got to do this slower. Bub is very, very dumb. He's not going to, because he would just kind of want to, and I said, no, I can't follow that. And so finally, and he just, he'd do it half that time. He'd go, it's not nearly slow enough. So finally, after having, discussed it several times, this is before we went on camera, I use actor strategy, which is you just be the character. And if what he does works, I'll respond. But if it doesn't work, I just won't respond. And somewhere there must be some takes where he goes, and I just... Anyway, I forced him to slow down enough so that he could plausibly, realistically teach this very, very, very slow, stupid creature. And what you saw in that sense genuinely was improvised. But he was a great guy. It was fun to work with him. He had a great sense of humor, and it was, our scenes had a real spark, because he brought a lot to it. Yes?
Do you know if they're going to do a scene with Dr. Logan getting up after he gets shot?
Pardon me?
Were they going to film a scene where Logan got up after they shot him, or did they? Was it designed for him to lay there? You knew he was dead.
I don't know. No idea. I mean, that's one of the things on film in general. When you see a movie, of course it's all edited together, and you go from one shot to one shot to one shot to one shot. I mean, any given shot took hours to put together, and many, many, many different departments who were all collaborating, and the nexus of that collaboration is the director, the AD, the assistant director, who's kind of the general of the whole operation, and the director of photography. They're really the only people that know what all is going on. Any given actor probably only knows what is directly related to his role, what he's going to do. And even though when you see the movie, you're cutting that thing that I'm looking at in that scene might have been done 2 weeks ago. that scene where they pulled him apart and shot him and all of that, I wasn't even there that day. I was part of the chase.
Plus, no movie shot in sequential order.
Right.
No good movie is. The occasional shot on video film.
Right,
Yeah, right.
What? Other questions?
With Day being your only horror film, kind of, normal for you, how did you feel about working in the makeup and acting with all makeup?
Oh, the makeup was just a dream. I mean, it was kind of tedious to sit there and have it applied. The worst part was getting it off, really. I was kind of allergic to this substance that they had to use to dissolve the surgical adhesive that they use, I guess. But the substance of the prosthetic piece, I mean, it was a thing that covered my whole face and my neck, and it went down as far as my chest. This latex foam is so much the consistency of flesh. It was kind of amazing the first time I stood in the mirror and I, would move my face and it would move in a extraordinarily believable way. And that was really the process where the character kind of gelled in my own imagination when I stood in front of a mirror and saw, if I moved my mouth in different ways, and I had these teeth and everything, that I could see this other creature that was, something very different than myself.
Other questions before we get to the film?
Did you have any personal complications working down in the mine system that it was filmed in?
No. It's, just another dark room. I mean, another, lots of.
There are a number of actors on the film that had, it said that once they stayed down there a number of times, it started really getting to them.
Yeah, I know. I heard that. I didn't. I guess once you were down there, it looked like any other sort of generic industrial complex.
Yeah,
it's not that it was
another set.
dark and tight. It was just
Excellent.
the fact that it was underground.
Probably squeeze in one more. So I only got 7 minutes on mine. Go ahead.
She had
There was, in the last scene, you're trying to see Bub's trailing off. Has there been any talk about, a story about what happens to Bub afterwards?
Nobody's talked to me about it.
Dead
I've had a
Dog-
few ideas.
Chaz and Dead Dog has got a little. They have their comic coming out, which is kind of a continuation.
Yeah.
We talked about it earlier in Tom Sullivan talk, but Dead Dog Comics has got a kind of a sequel to Day of the Dead coming out in comic form, which is kind of like what happens to Bub after that movie. Bub's still alive.
Now remember the story, the climax of the film here. Why don't we recreate the Bub chant at Cinema Wasteland? Wouldn't that be fun? Who thinks that would be fun? I think that would be fun. So. Stop and see him. He's here for the weekend.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank Howard for coming in.
Thank you, Howard.
Bob.